Um, it's sort of a funny thing to have this call that we say is, this is our action team for fundraising. But then if you watch what we're doing with Gitcoin right now, the action team is a little bit in its own zone. If we were playing basketball right now, they'd have a little picture of the ball at the bottom with like a fire on it. With how much activity we have going on. But what I think would be really nice for us for this call is to really keep building on what we talked about 2 weeks ago. So I'd love to hear an update about anything that happened if there was a call last week, since we were in Bucaramanga doing things related to our visas. And this conversation about what it means for us to become like an ecosystem of change agents, to be telling our personal stories, to have our personal stories blend into the larger field, and how we can weave relationships in the larger field to achieve collective goals. And so, rather than talking about, like, I feel like I've given so many talks about what we're doing with Gitcoin right now and how we're using it to form alliances and stuff that I just don't want to, I don't even want to talk about it. Some of you might be tired of hearing me talk about it. We can weave that into the conversation where it's helpful. But what I'd love to hold space for today is, how are we each sort of like little locus points, like places of transformation in the way our own stories are playing out, because our stories are playing out together. And this relates to a really interesting part of this work that has not been the focus, but I think from this conversation forward, maybe it should be, which is not how do we do fundraising for Barichara, but rather, how do we create mutual aid and mutual support between us as change agents, which will elevate the story of collective action that we're all a part of. And I think that will greatly help the Barichara fundraising, but it'll be sort of like a side effect, because we'll end up fundraising for collaborators. Like, we may fundraise for the Legacy Project with Brian and Susan at some point. We may fundraise for things Todd's involved with. We may fundraise to bring people into the work who would otherwise not be able to. And I just want to break that wall. I don't know if you all are familiar with the metaphor of the fourth wall, which is that in a democracy, there is government, there's civil society, there is I forget what the third one is at the moment, and then there's media. And media is the one whose job is to tell the story of everything that's happening. And without the storytelling, you can't have democracy. So why propaganda makes democracies impossible. But one of the metaphors is to break down the fourth wall, which is to show how storytelling is being done. It's like going behind the curtain of a theater production, and there's an illusion of a fourth wall, and then you break it down. And one way I want to break down the fourth wall here is this idea that there's a team fundraising for Barichara, as though Barichara is like an island or a box, and it's somehow separate from everything else. The truth is, we're weaving everything in the same direction. And so we need to take that illusion of there being a wall and make it an illusion, make it fake, break it down. And so I think what might be nice for our use of time today is, first, if anyone would like to give an update about what happened last week when Penny and I weren't able to be there, we'd love to hear that for however the meeting went last week. And then I'd love to have some conversations about each of our personal stories, but told in this way. Let's talk to each other about what we're doing as it relates to this larger work, where we can all see that Barichara is sort of like a symbol of some kind of larger work. And I think each of us has our own story in our heads about what that means. Like, Brian and Susan showed up because what they're doing in Ontario is part of a larger story that they saw Barichara as a part of. Todd, you showed up to help us with Giveth and with some of these things early on, and got into Earth Regenerators because there's a larger story. And so what I'd love for us to see is how each of us tell our own story in the context of the larger story, which is to share with each other, I am working on these things in service to this larger thing. Does everyone kind of get the sense of this? And this is going to be a mapping process for us to see how to co-create better, which is definitely going to help with fundraising indirectly. but actually it's going to help us with alliance formation, which is much more powerful than fundraising. It's fundraising in support of the alliances. And so this is like a precursor step. So first off, was there anyone on the call last week that could give a summary for those of us who weren't able to attend?
Did the call happen? I signed on and I didn't see anyone on. So
I don't know. I didn't hear anything back about it. So no feedback was returned to me about whether it happened.
okay.
Yeah, I wasn't able to make it at all. Even if you had been here, Joe, I wasn't able to make it last week. So I guess it probably didn't happen.
Perfect. Then does everyone understand the reasoning behind this exercise we're going to do? Then who would like to begin? Just basically what we're going to do is we've got 50 minutes. And I think the best way to use our 50 minutes is for us to spend maybe 30 minutes. So like there are like 7 of us, so each person takes about 5 minutes, or you're able to take 5 minutes if you like. And what I want you to talk about is the things you're working on in service to the larger purpose that you see us all connected to. And what we're all going to be listening for is, what is it that's driving you and what is your story? And what is your perspective or your perception on what that larger story is? And it doesn't have to be the same. Actually, the diversity will be strength. So you don't have to try to make it that Brian's story is the same as Todd's. You tell the stories, you understand it, and we're all going to be looking at the synergies. And then we can use the last 20 minutes of our time to start feeling into strategies. Notice I'm using the word feel into. We're not analyzing, we're not creating, we're not implementing, we're sensing. We're going to sense into strategies. And this is going to inform how we do fundraising and alliance building and collaboration. And so maybe we can do it by passing the baton forward. So someone volunteers to go first. They name who's going second, and then after that, everyone's had enough warning. So, so who would like to go first, including you, if you like? Whoever would like to go first.
I can go. I'll go
Okay,
first.
and who will you pass to?
I'll pass to JP if she's awake. Okay, I think she's awake. So I would say that there's kind of like two fronts or two ways that I'm working. The first is just integrating myself into the community here in Barichara. So, and also into this family with Joe and Elise. And that's been a lot of my focus has been integrating, and especially with Elise. And so, and then starting to feel into what's how important like the regenerative education part is, and you know, working for regeneration for the future generations. And so that's part of it. And part of it for me is learning Spanish. It's been a huge focus of mine, just to be able to even communicate, but also to be part of it, to start to integrate into the community and into the work that's happening here. So I spend a lot of my days, a lot of my day studying Spanish and practicing Spanish. And then I've just started a project at the Bioparque. So starting to really integrate with the land, feeling like the different kinds of plants. I'm clearing out a ceremonial space there. So starting to feel into what will it be, you know, how I can integrate my healing work into the medicine women community that's here. So that's kind of on this front. And then I'm also, now I'm helping organize the Refi Barichara event, and I'm starting to do trainings for people to do the Gitcoin thing, and just like working with Joe on anything that has to do with like the greater world aspects. And then just a little bit of integration into ER as well in the governance group and doing the accounting for that. So this is like all in service, for me, it's in service to creating bioregions, you know, creating regenerative bioregions across the world and networking them. So that's how I'm working. I think that's all I'll share for now. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. So JP.
Okay. Let's see. Hi everyone.
Hello, darling. Lovely to see you.
Thanks. Yes, I'm coming to from my nap so I could be present for my Friday nights are 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. and Saturday mornings are 7 a.m. So this is my little crunch time of the week. So apologies for my slits for eyes. Okay, what am I working on? How do I begin? I was chatting with Mila the other day, and we were talking about the kind of ecosystem weaving that we do, which might be a little bit different than what's happening on the ground, which is about connecting communities. And that's done through relationships. So yeah, I find myself weaving worlds these days, as well as really just supporting and stewarding communities within Earth Regenerators, which is a really significant place for me. And I'm involved in a number of spots there. The sort of the connective tissue, tending the connective tissue within communities is my work. And I guess on a larger, not really a larger, a more personal level, where my focus is in how we reweave our torn social fabric. And that means I'll often find myself in the place where there's been a challenge to assist us finding our way back together again, wherever that occurs. So that has me working in the areas of trauma and conflict resolution and finding our ways to harmony, not necessarily, and sitting in the discomfort when that needs to occur. So yeah, that's what I'm working on in the context of ER. In the wider world, I do a lot of advising work, interestingly, in the areas of blockchain. And my passion there is really how we do economy differently. And a big piece of my query is where is the source of this trauma and suffering that we have? And it always traces back to how we've done economics over the last several thousand years. So now if we're going to reinvent a world that works for everyone in Bucky's terms, how will we change this? So I am working on a number of projects and with a number of organizations in this very space, and on Earth Regenerators and Spirit of the Gift with Todd and with Jonathan, among others. And that's one of my favorite places to play. Yeah. And then I'm involved with several organizations, foundations, cooperatives, etc., who are also keenly interested in this. And then the last area, I've just landed in Australia and I'm figuring out how to be of service here now, because I'm not yet in my forever place in Australia. I know that I'm not going to be staying where I am indefinitely because I'm in suburbia and that's not where I'm going to stay. But I don't know where I'm going yet. And I have to decide shortly what form I shall take now that I get to pop my head up and be on the system again, because I've been off waiting for my visa. You're not allowed to work in Australia. So I've been off the grid. And so I'm setting that up, and that means I get to decide. So do I want to hang out my shingle, continuing as the recovering futurist that I am, or do I want to do something else? So that's me. That's what I'm up to. And how about Todd? Over to you.
Oh, we still can't hear you, Todd, for some reason.
Even though you're on-
Really? Okay.
Now we hear you. There you are. You're back.
Oh, all right.
Time delay.
I'm showing up today my heart is very heavy. I think this may be one of the hardest weeks I've had in my life. There's a lot of stuff going on, but that's neither here nor there. I am showing up in a few different ways. I would say this is one of the things that I'm doing in my life that brings me joy and makes me feel connected to something greater than myself. I am participating in a few groups, specifically the Spirit of the Gift pod with JP and Jonathan and a few others. And I am taking the role of technology steward to help build tools and technologies that enables the continuation of giving and care activities that already exist here, specifically around funding and identifying opportunities for identifying kind of needs that are emergent within the community. So I'm going to be presenting a deck, I guess a presentation on the ER fund governance team this next hour. That is an overview of the technology that has been co-created within these groups. So the heart behind that is having spent a large amount of time in kind of the banking and finance world and the corporate world kind of more generally. It's my sense that it's going to be informal kind of emergent networks like this that actually create value outside of profits for shareholders. And my work here, I think, is representative of my commitment to supporting work as close as possible to the ground. And I'm really excited about kind of the diversity of opportunities that could be realized in the future, whether it's kind of local cooperative organizations, community land trusts, creating stewardship structures that actually return kind of rights and sovereignty to the land, rematriation, if you will. And create, I think, the word that encapsulates this in kind of in my head is like reestablishing the commons or giving more life back to the commons, because the commons really already exists. So that's what's on my heart this morning. I think that's all that wants to be said. I will pass it to Brian.
Thank you, Todd. Yeah, we've been, Susan Bosak and I have been doing 7th generation work for a number of years. And it's really born out of the recognition that we need a big picture type of approach to addressing community issues, world issues, because everything is so interconnected. All the systems are interconnected. The education system reflects the economic system. The social supports that we put in place are all built around that. So the issues in communities, you just can't go in and start a program to increase senior social inclusion in a community. It has to be part of a larger approach. because narrow approaches, you can build programs, but you're not going to solve problems, and it will help some people, but ultimately programs lose funding and things go away. Then layered on top of that are the ecological issues the planet is facing, and the recognition of the fact that the way we're living, we need to reevaluate that if we're going to address the penultimate challenge of the ecological issues and climate change. So with Seventh Generation Markham, we're trying to look at interconnecting issues, weaving in Indigenous worldviews and knowledge, bringing generations together who've been separated in communities. And so there's many facets to the work. The work in Barichara has been quite good in terms of us making connections, helping to make connections to something bigger for people. If you're going to help people think about the way that we're currently living, you have to find ways to shift their perspective, to help them connect in relationship, to help them look at their relationships, not only with each other in community, but with the world around them, with the land, with nature. And one way is to make the bigger connections, and really admire the work that Joe's doing and how he makes the connections. And so we're looking at weaving in what we're doing here, making the connections to the work in Barichara, to the work in other bioregions, so that we can get people to think bigger, to think beyond their municipal boundaries, to think beyond their day-to-day lives. So that's a great way to help people shift perspectives and to think. So part of that is telling the story and weaving in the story where you can, making it a natural part of what you're doing. And so always, Susan is always looking for opportunities, and Joe noticed the tweet that she did this week, connecting the older gentleman that Joe talked about, who goes regularly to the Beale Parque to help with the restoration and maintenance of the area. And a local man here, an older gentleman who regularly goes for walks in the park and picks up the garbage that people have thrown around and always comes back with a couple of pails full of garbage. So it's those types of things where you can get that out there, tell the story, make the connections, help people to think beyond their everyday life. And I think that's going to be an important part of it. If Susan was here, she could be much more eloquent in terms of how she's going to make the connection. She's great at synthesis and making these connections. But that's how we're trying to connect all of this. And also looking at the work here from a bioregional perspective, I think is going to really help people shift perspective. So we've, as I've said in the past meetings, we found references to the Greater Toronto bioregion and how that was defined, the watersheds and so on. And I think that will be really helpful to shift perspective as well. Connecting people to a bioregional perspective will be really helpful in all of this as well. And then connecting to other bioregions around the world. I will pass it over to Jonathan.
Great, thank you so much. I don't know, maybe you want to go first? No, okay. So this has been a wild ride for the last year and a half, or however long we've been doing this. I can't even remember now, but I was part of the first learning journey on regenerative finance, which was especially important to me because we actually started an operation of our nonprofit called Regenerative Financing about 5 or 6 years ago, with the explicit intention to begin to draw capital into the regenerative space. And for us, first of all, that meant trying to decarbonize buildings in America. But then a couple of years ago, I think I suggested to the Conservation Finance Alliance that we try to figure out a way to use property assessments to finance ecosystem restoration. And so that became a little project on the side that didn't have any practical application, but was driving me to think more about these issues and read more about them. And I guess in the course of some of that, I came across Joe's work in Medium, and that was like, God, the guy has it together and has actually figured this out. So I'm going to find out what's going on in Joe's life. So in the subsequent months, I've kind of jumped into all kinds of groups in ER. Have been part of the Regenerative Projects Incubator, and it was interesting to me because I, at one point, ran an incubator for Fairleigh Dickinson University that was focused on renewable energies and sustainable projects. It was part of what we called the Institute for Sustainable Enterprise, which then died under a particularly right-wing administration in New Jersey. And then, of course, into the bioregional catalysts, and then into the ER Fund Group. And so I've slowly kind of withdrawn from some of those things to focus on the finance side of this, which has been really interesting and challenging in some ways, because what we're trying to do is kind of reinvent the way that we think about money and the way that we think about engagement and projects and stipends and things like that. And it's something that has preoccupied me for many, many years. I had done some writing about alternative currencies, and that's kind of part of what drew me into this area. And then was, most recently delighted to start reading Rachel's book about.
Rachel just arrived at our doorstep.
Great.
Jonathan saying he just stumbled upon your book. Okay. If you'd like to join, and then Todd is here too, so you guys can all be co-presenters in half an hour. Please continue, Jonathan.
So yeah, really, really fascinating to read the story of people re-examining their lives in the Western world and beginning to look at how they could kind of redirect their energies in a way that was more satisfying and more fulfilling to them. My feeling right now is that I have a foot in both worlds, that on the one hand, most of my work and thinking during the day is about regenerative perspectives and how this is going to be applied everywhere from the super local. First of all, we've been in this house for almost exactly a year now, because we came into possession of it at the beginning of October and started transforming what had been a quarter acre of lawn into an orchard and a vegetable garden, and a place with as little lawn as possible, but with as much organic material being incorporated into the soil. And we're at a point now where I'm finally beginning to think that there are a few things that we can show people, because at the beginning, all it looks like is a quarter acre of wood chips and some straggling little plants that were struggling to stay alive. And one of the kind of thoughts that I had about, what many of us are trying to do outside of the quote unquote, I don't know if you call it the real world, but certainly the resistant everyday life world of getting in your car and going to buy gas and going to big box stores and going to supermarkets and hardware stores to do things that we think are running truly counter to this culture, which is disintegrating in so many ways. And, for a long time in my life, I thought about the regenerative kind of work as creating islands of sanity. And now it looks to me like creating territories of sanity. And I think that's just an amazing transition. And I really do want to mention about the Gitcoin and the blockchain and the cryptocurrency. That's just a whole world opening up with possibility for me. Whereas before, the way I saw it was that the Bitcoin was just this kind of refuge of scoundrels. And thinking about our culture, as people talk about composting modernity and hospicing modernity, thinking of our entire culture as a commons and how we can regain some control over it and how we can, try not to do that because I lose the plot here. And so we're starting at one level at a very, very tiny neighborhood space. We just walked around our neighborhood, which consists of 3 streets, and dropped off flyers at everyone's house, and spoke to a dozen residents about holding a neighborhood garage sale, and then looking at issues of resilience and creating a list so that we can help each other in the event of emergencies and things like that. Kind of a gentle way to bring people into the conversation. So it's the kind of the micro scale and then the macro scale, at which I feel that we're working with ER. This is, I guess, part of what I'm trying to say here in terms of the bioregional element of this is we are now living in an area which was not at all familiar to me, especially. Had no history here in upstate New York. No clarity as to what the culture was. Learning about the Haudenosaunee people, who were the original 6 nations who occupied this area, but still having no sense of how to delineate any kinds of boundaries of a bioregion for the southern shore of Lake Ontario. And but wanting to use the bioregional framework as a way of thinking about our activities locally and on a day-to-day basis, and historically with the history of the native peoples here, and coming to the sense that the boundaries are not that important to kind of define in some geopolitical sense, but that what's important is thinking about how the earth is held together by its biological elements. And so that's been really great. And to me, it's just like finding sane people around the world that we can actually have conversations with, that we can engage with, that we can work with, that we can kind of plan with some possibilities for the future. And that's what gets me up in the morning. So that's my story. Victoria?
So, I'm gonna pass right now because we've heard a lot of our kind of general story together. So, Paula.
I don't know. Not feeling very well today.
Oh, do you need a hug, Paula? Are you doing okay?
You look sad. No.
Yeah, I guess I am. Because it's gotta go away.
Well, we're here for you, Paula. We'll hold this.
Thank you.
Rachel, would you like to share, or do you want to just be a fly on the wall?
Well, I feel like I've spent a lot of time telling my story, and but I don't know that I have anything really. I don't know. I think I'm just really enjoying Jonathan's story and all the things that I feel like I'm connecting with in what you're saying. So I think maybe I would just say, yeah, and then pass it on from there. But thank you.
Then what I can do is I can start to offer a little bit of just permaculture. If you recall, permaculture is observing patterns in an ecosystem and then coming to care for those patterns. Like that's all permaculture is. And so the permaculture here would be, I want to observe some patterns and then I want to give love to them. And so I observed a couple of patterns that were really interesting in what all of you said. One pattern is that as each of you is connecting to your own story, it radiates out into the stories of others around you. So there's a pattern level of connection there. Todd's going through some difficulties right now, which he chose not to name. Paula's going through some difficulties she's chose not to name. But we can feel that we're in relational spaces that are important. And Jonathan and Victoria went to their neighbors to organize a neighborhood garage sale, which could, if we imagine with what we're doing with Gitcoin, what if you found 2 or 3 people who wanted to actually set up a MetaMask wallet and a GitHub account and donate to this network of projects with $1,000 in matching funds per project because of the way that Gitcoin works, that actually your neighbors could become major leverages of matching funds in Gitcoin. Just noticing this thing of what happens in the adjacency. What I mean by adjacency is you have a set of relationships, but what are those relationships sitting next to? And right now, because each of you is sitting next to our Gitcoin round, you have people who are sitting next to the Gitcoin round. And that's just one example, just a concrete example that's present now, is that how we are sitting in a relational field, and especially as what JP said about mending and tending to the fragments and the fracturing and the tatters of the social fabric in the relational field. We can actually bring people into these stories with us. And that's one thing, one pattern I saw that I want to give care to. Another pattern I saw was how each of you in different ways talked about bioregionalism, even if you didn't use the word. JP talking about how to transform her story of self in this new period of finding a permanent place. That's definitely not the suburbs. Jonathan expressing that he was sort of lost in the hinterlands of a new bioregion that he knew nothing about. Brian talking about how his bioregion doesn't even know itself as a bioregion, but it could know itself as a bioregion by seeing Barichara as a bioregion or seeing some other place. Penny talking about how when you start to think about family and children, you can't help but enter into a place. And if you have a barrier like language barrier or some cultural barrier, you're flying blind in your bioregion. And so there was a sense that something about being bioregional, whether we use the word or not, is so important in what we're doing. And there's something really important about the inter-bioregional exchange, that we each learn from each other's places. And I think Brian articulated that the most explicitly by telling Susan's story of the man in Markham and Don Jesus here, that if we can make direct narrative connections to something larger, it actually opens a space to change mindsets. And so I'll sort of stop the pattern observing now and go into a little pattern synthesizing. So pattern synthesizing is, okay, we see some of these patterns. I didn't name all the patterns I saw, but these are a few of them. How do we start to synthesize patterns? Well, for the last half hour, we did. Each of you listened to each other's stories. And as Rachel said, she liked hearing Jonathan's story. That we relate to ourselves by hearing the other person's story. And so the synthesizing just occurs as the interaction between humans happens when we tell stories. This is a really, really big deal, because the way forward as Jonathan had mentioned with regenerative finance, as Todd had mentioned in supporting cooperatives in the commons and community land trusts, other models of finance, or as JP had said, how all the destruction in the world in some way is related to the way that we create our economies and how we live them out, that we can actually practice fundraising for something like Barichara. Yeah, thanks for the thing about the trusts, Todd. That's something that I'm holding very close to heart right now with what we're prototyping for Refi Barichara. How to create community trusts for bioregions and bioregional trusts, and things that Todd and I have talked about before, and Tony and I have talked about, and a few others are trying to envision. That this other piece is, how do we create different economic models? The problem with saying that phrase, how do we create different economic models, is in two words, economic and models. Both of those words will tend to evoke Cartesian dualism. They'll tend to evoke that the model is separate from the territory, that economies are something that destroys life. You know, there'll be various ways that cultural baggage makes those two words loaded words. And so if we want to say, how do we try to create alternative economic models? What if we say it this way? How do we try to create different ways of helping each other thrive? How do I help Todd thrive? Paula's having a bad day. How do we help Paula thrive? Penny's struggling to integrate into a family in another language. How do we help Penny feel better as she's going through that? And it turns out, you know, as I talked about in one of the webinars in the Regenerative Finance Learning Journey, that trophic flow, which is the flow of nutrients and energy in a food web, is exactly how regenerative economies work. And that a pro-social human group like us sharing our stories right now is a trophic flow, meaning we're a flow of energy and nutrients to each other, which means that a pro-social group is a regenerative financial system. We are storing and sharing finance, or we're storing and sharing value expressed through different modes in our interactions with each other. And so the best way to build regenerative finance models is to practice relating to people around you differently. And so this opens up a really interesting opportunity for us, which is, I want us to feel like anytime we help Barichara succeed, it's helped each of us personally succeed in some way that's meaningful and true. So if Brian says, I have a better story to tell here in Markham because of what I see happening in Barichara, that's a very nice example. If Todd says, I'm trying to create technologies that take my insights about economics and finance, that actually show people there's a different way. And with Margarita and Barichara, they were able to do it. And that gives me an example I can use. Or any other version of that, where you actually gain for yourself by giving to someone else. We gain for ourselves by giving to someone else. But we don't do it to gain for ourselves. Both sides, both of the gains happen as a byproduct of something else. And that byproduct is acting in care for something we love. We act and care for something we love, and we look at how the value exchange works. And that's how we prototype alternative economic models, which is why helping each other to learn how to thrive is a better terminology than creating alternative economic models for most of us, even though we're creating alternative economic models. And so, for example, as all of you have been watching what we're doing with Gitcoin in the last 10 days, does that create a story that you could use to help your other projects? Just as an example, by participating in this and learning about it, does it give you a way of collaborating differently? Does it give you a way of forming alliances differently? So remember what I said at the beginning of this activity was I wanted us to spend about a half an hour sharing stories, and then the rest of our time sensing into how we create strategies, sensing into it. How would it feel to create strategies in this way? How would it feel for us to help each other? What did you hear or feel about someone else's story that made you want to help them? How would helping them help you? Not so that you track it as a transaction, but just so you make it more visible. And so you can tell the story to someone else better. Because this is how we create regenerative finance, is in our interpersonal relationships with each other in real world contexts and real moments. That's how we do it. That's how I'm doing it. And so this conversation does move us toward action and fundraising very strongly, because we start to get much more clear on what our stories are. Notice stories in plural. Our stories, our diversity of stories. How can I help Brian's story? How can I help JP's? How can I help Jonathan's? How can I help Rachel's? How can I help Penny's? How, you see it? Like, we ask this. How can I help your story? And how does helping your story help my story? And this is how we'll do fundraising. Because it's going to turn out that these stories are so powerful, people will step in to bring the resources we need to make them happen. People will. We don't even know who they are. We may not even know them yet. Almost all of the crowdfunding I've done in the last 5 years has been people I don't know who follow me on Twitter. Almost all of it comes from people I'm not close to. So it's not that I know who to get money from. It's I know how to tell a story out to the world that cause people to show up and make the story real. That's how we'll do fundraising. Because what we need to do is manifest a way of telling stories together that enable these bioregional, these integrated landscape, these larger systemic patterns to hold coherence as stories so that they can be fed and come to life. So we've got 10 minutes until a lot of you will need to go for the next call. And I just want to ask, are there any reflections? Not next steps, reflections. Are there any reflections that you have about this process? Penny.
I was just thinking about the integrated stories, like, I wonder if there's a way we could each be telling our stories, but be referring to each other so that it's like interwoven in whatever platform we're, like if we're on Facebook, we tag each other in the story, and people are kind of going back in between, to all of our different perspectives and stories. And on ER, we could do the same thing, and just trying to think about, like, how would we actually, interweave our stories to make it visible that they're interwoven to the world. That's what I'm.
Beautiful. Jonathan or Victoria, whichever, raise their hand.
Yeah, I really love this little tying it together, because as we move into, Jonathan and I, into a donation model in the commercial real estate area, where there aren't a lot of donation things going on in the commercial real estate area. It's all about money. The thing that we're doing, though, is to help communities decarbonize their building stock, which the community really never seems to own, but really owns them. That telling these stories in a community, which is where our work is focused at the community level, directly and then indirectly decarbonizing the building stock. So that since we're talking to the community level, having these players share their stories and use the different capitals to benefit one another and see that there's value in all these other capitals that isn't financial, that isn't fiat kind of thing. That we can weave a community that will eventually see the value of taking care of their building stock and decarbonizing it. So the focus on, not how are we going to be able to get people to donate to us for our work, it's more how do we empower everyone in the community to share their stories of what they're up to. And it will all goes around, comes around, because we'll become part of the community and become part of the people that help one another. So that was really nice. Thank you. I really see a light at the end of the tunnel through this donation model, which has kind of scared me, because I see that people in this economic times are kind of trying to or keep stuff for themselves. People are feeling scarcity a lot. So thanks, that's really great.
Yeah, that's a very powerful insight, Victoria. And just before passing to JP, I'll add one comment. If you hold the space for people to tell each other their stories, they will fall in love with each other and they will love you for holding the space. That's how it works. So just to name, and that is a regenerative finance model right there. That is look, it's value flow stored within a system. That's a regenerative finance model. Help people tell their stories in the community so they love each other and they'll love you for holding the space is an abundance model of regenerative finance. JP, please.
Thanks for naming that, Joe. That's lovely. And that happens a lot in Earth Regenerators, which is a beautiful emergent property of the community. I have a few things to share here. First is on it's something Confucius said when asked if he were able to wave his magic wand, what would he do first for an enlightened society? And he said, the first thing I would do would be to correct language. So this has been a challenge for a long time. And in particular, you know, our language around economics, as we've observed, you know, it's the dismal science for good reason, the measurement of dead things, etc. I and Jonathan and Todd know this well from our conversations in the spirit of the gift. I prefer to use the term circulation. I love the model of the body, of the flowing of fluids and the interactions of systems as a way to discuss this. And another really challenging term we have is the one you've just named, which is value. And I believe that economics in particular, and how the narrative of economics has been co-opted, makes us confuse price with value. Oscar Wilde said it really well. He called a cynic someone who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. And I'll leave you with this, which is something that's occurred to me before and came up in listening to this conversation, which is the value of bread is the nutrition that it brings to your body. That has nothing to do with the price of the bread on the market. If we can keep that distinction clear, we'll go a long way towards regenerating our financial system. So, and there's another confusion between finance and economics, and finance and money, and finance and we won't even go there. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up and then hand over to my friend Todd, who I wish I could give a hug to right now.
Thanks. I need it.
Yeah.
There was just a
Oh,
big
this is
hug.
coming to you, Todd.
Thanks.
Aw.
There we go.
There was a thought that bubbled up, I guess, as Joe was speaking, and then kind of came up again as JP was speaking, and it's really about kind of language and narrative. First is the word finance in and of itself has ends. It is like from the French end, and that's like a terminal point. That's like it's like it to me. It has a spirit of like dead, and the word economics and economy come from the Greek word oikos, which is distinct from domos, which is kind of the familial household. Oikos, I think, has this sense of like collective house. There's a lot of discussion in that, but I think it's interesting to think about the words and how they're thought of, and the spirit they hold kind of in our age. And speaking of value flow, I think if we were to actually return to this understanding of like the study of economics as like the study of like the shared house and the understanding of shared like value flows, I think finance would be a very small component of it. And depending on who you talk to or what websites you read, there's like multiple forms of value, multiple forms of capital, if you will, up to 8. I think finance is probably the least important. And I would make the argument, and I would defend it, that finance was the latest, like the end form of value. And it is preceded by care on behalf of the earth to us. It's preceded by relationships. It's preceded by knowledge and understanding and spirit. And so I guess the thought is just like, how do we embody this understanding that just by being together we can share value, and if money is a need at some point, that will come. But I think shifting language and shifting understanding of language is something that has to be done explicitly. Like, it has to be a named activity. And I guess I feel it's my responsibility to kind of participate in that. I'm glad there are other people within the Earth Regenerators Network that can also participate in that activity. But that came up for me as we were speaking, and I think there's so much value here, and there's so much opportunity. And how do we build? If the ends, kind of the finance or the terminal point, how do we build the means which precede the ends? I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. And just because we're right at 1 minute till the next meeting, I want to just rename our purpose for this meeting that happens every week. And we'll see how we just spent the last hour serving it. Our purpose is to mobilize resources in service to the integrated landscape model, raising $500,000 for Barichara, which was articulated in a slightly different form earlier in this journey, where we're now, we might name it differently. But just to name that is what we're doing, to then make it easier to tell the story for other landscapes as well. And so with that said, it's a very nice transition for closing this call, and for those of us who are going on to the ER Fund Governance Group to carry this energy and spirit to the next group, and for all of us to just carry this forward in ourselves and feel into how we tell our stories. I love Penny's suggestion. Let's weave each other into our stories. If you want a nice example, and if you're my friend on Facebook, a few days ago, I posted about Penny and me and our relationship. It's got like 300 likes or something. And you can see how I'm weaving our stories together. That's a really nice example. But just to do that in general. And it celebrates Penny because she's awesome. So I like doing that. Anyway, love you all. Big hugs, especially for Paula and Todd, but for everyone. And one more time, the group hug, the group hug, the group hug. Oh, we love you guys.
Oh.
And now we won't hold you from the other meeting anymore. Onward, fellow humans.